So when we first getting started with Kubernetes, it's quite complicated because it consists of many components. For example, this is the official document. It shows essential components of Kubernetes. But let me draw and explain the why we need those components and what are the functionalities of each of component. So let me draw and explain. So I will start by assume that without Kubernetes, and then how can I deploy some services. So assume I'm a developer here and there are some machines. First machine I call it node 1 and another node, node 2, right. So without Kubernetes, I'm gonna remote access via SSH into one node, and then I run some Docker command, and then I can launch the first container for one service, and then I launch another container for another service, and then I do similar thing in node 2. Also remote access. Right. Well, it looks like possible. However, this approach is not good, and there are many challenges. The first one is we need to decide which node to host which containers or scheduler. Which node to host which container. For example, if CPU and RAM has been consumed, almost in this node, or this node is run out of CPU RAM. So it is not possible to add any additional containers in node 2, right? So we need a mechanism to schedule which node to host which containers. Second, we need to maintain desired state. For example, if this container somehow crashes, so we need to detect and then we need to relaunch, right? So we need a mechanism to maintain desired state. If there is difference or deviation between the current state and the desired state, we need a mechanism to reconcile. And third, developers need to communicate with these functionalities via APIs. A good set of APIs, right? Not SSH, but APIs, right? And another functionalities, I assume that I have multiple developers and I want to manage permissions. For example, these developers can only lead parts, you know, and it's not allowed to delete part. So for that, we also need role-based access control or back, right? And Kubernetes provide all the functionalities or solve the challenge, right? So you see the logic. Now I'm gonna draw a basic, right, architecture of a Kubernetes cluster. So we keep in mind we need some requirement. The first one is scheduler. The second one, we need to maintain desired state. A third one, we need a set of APIs, right? So let me draw control plane first. So in control plane, we need scheduler, right? The first one I'm gonna call it API server. So it provide a set of API, for developer, for worker nodes to communicate with the control planes. The second component is controller management. I explain it later. And the next component is scheduler. And the final component is etcd, right? And those are most essential components of control plane. And now I draw data plane. I assume that I have a few nodes. The first node, node 1. Okay. Let me make it a little bit bigger so I have more space to explain. Okay. So first, in order to enable communication between each node and the control planes, so there is a daemon called Kubernetes. 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 So this enable communication between nodes and API servers. There is a communication channels. And similar for the second node. We also have Kubernetes. So Kubernetes in every node, and it enables the communication between API servers and node. That's it. And then I assume that I have some port 1 for one service and another part for another service, right? So to manage the traffic or to route traffic to different service, there is a component called kube proxy. Kube proxy. So it will set up network rules, right, to route traffic to different services. Okay, and I assume that I have a developer here, and developer need to call some APIs, so it also via API servers, and we can use Kubernetes. Okay, and the next component is controller management, right? So it actually not one controller, but it will manage a list of multiple controllers, right? And each controllers will manage the desired state. For example, I make a deployment, and I want replicas, 3 pods, 3 pods running on 2 nodes, right? So one controllers will maintain the desired state of 3 pods, right? Or another examples, if I want to expose service via application load balancer, ALB, assume that I'm working on AWS. So somehow Kubernetes need to create an ALBs inside AWS. So it needs ALB controller, right? Which will create ALB inside AWS account, right? So that is the functionality of controllers. The next component is a scheduler. So scheduler will schedule, which node to host which container, right? Based on CPU requests, CPU limits, and also memory request, right? The last component is this etcd. So this store a key value pair, for example secret, password. Okay, so I go through some essential components of a Kubernetes cluster. In control plane we got API server, control management, scheduler, etcd. In each worker node we have kubelet, we have kube proxy, and there are many other components and functionalities. You have to dive deep into the docs, for example web UI, DNS, right, container runtime, logging, monitoring. So that's it, and thank you.